Today we are working Psalm 53. Traditionally, Psalm 53 is often worked to feel and radiate divine love, to protect from known and unknown enemies, and to stop gossip and slander. So today I want to stop gossip and slander. Now, you use this to stop gossip and slander from happening to you, and you can also use it to help stop gossip and slander coming from you. One of the first things you can do to help stop gossip and slander coming toward you is to stop dishing it out. So this will help you on both fronts. Now, if you don't have any gossip or slander that you need to deal with, you feel free to use this psalm for any of those other purposes or any purpose that you desire. The way we work Psalm Magic is very simple, easy, and effective. We take the psalm in question and we read it out loud all the way through once without stopping. After that incantation is finished, we go back through that same psalm and we take it verse by verse and we just consider the words and we try to dig and find and discover hidden symbols, hidden what we call occult meanings within the psalm. And we see those as magic seeds. By digging, searching, and finding, and then applying what we find there to the situation that we've brought to the psalm, we are taking those seeds of magic and planting them in the very fertile grounds of our minds, where they take root, they grow, they blossom forth, and then they bear fruit after their kind. And that is precisely what we are going to do right now together with Psalm 53. The fool hath said in his heart, there is no God. Corrupt are they, and have done abominable iniquity. There is none that doeth good. God looked down from heaven upon the children of men to see if there were any that did understand, that did see God. Every one of them is gone back, and they are altogether become filthy. There is none that doeth good, no, not one. Have the workers of iniquity no knowledge, who eat up my people as they eat bread? They have not called upon God. There were they in great fear, where no fear was. For God hath scattered the bones of him that encampeth against thee. Thou hast put them to shame, because God hath despised them. Oh, that the salvation of Israel were come out of Zion, when God bringeth back the captivity of his people. Jacob shall rejoice, and Israel shall be glad. Interestingly enough, this is an identical psalm to Psalm 14. Psalm 14 has one more verse than this one, but other than that, they are identical. There's also one other way that they differ, and that is that in Psalm 14, it is the tetragrammaton that is being referred to, and in this, it is Elohim. Other than that, they are the same exact psalm. It starts out with, the fool hath said in his heart, there is no God. When we decide that we are all by ourselves and that we have only ourselves and nobody but us, when we say that we are self-created and that there is no God and that there's only me, it's not that we're bad. It's just that we are allowing our ego mind full reign, because that's what the ego wants us to believe. The ego wants us to believe that we are self-created, that we do not have a creator, and that there is no higher mind, there is no higher intelligence, and there's nothing but us. You would think that would make us feel very powerful and very free, but it makes us feel very alone and very scared that we have put upon ourselves the responsibilities and the burdens of things that are not our responsibility. Because if there were no God, if there were no power higher than us, what do we look to as far as creating the sun and creating the ocean and creating the flowers and creating the air? And we know that we didn't create that. We know that we're just part of the line of creation. So when you start to believe that you are self-created and that there is nothing but you, it's foolish in that you cut yourself off from all of your power, from that whole line of power. Corrupt are they, and have done abominable iniquity. There is none that doeth good. When you're self-created and you're all by yourself, then of course you're going to be corrupt and not do good, because all you can do is react in fear. It's not that you're bad. It's just that you don't have anything other than reactive behavior, and you react in fear. And that's really what gossip is, a reaction in fear to something. A lot of times we believe that people gossip and slander because they are being evil. But what is evil according to this psalm other than a fear response? It's not that people are bad, it's that people are afraid. It's not that people are evil, it's that people are in pain. If somebody's in pain and needing healing, our response to that should be compassion, not judgment and condemnation. When we see other people lashing out and doing things like gossip and slander and other horrible things, once we understand, that's because they don't understand that they are a part of a greater whole, that they think that they're all by themselves and that they're all alone and that they're very scared and that they're in pain and that this is the best they can come up with. If we don't understand that, then we're going to lash out against them. And it's going to be nothing but action, reaction, action, reaction, action, reaction. And that's why forgiveness is not something that we do because we're weak. Forgiveness is something that we do because we are strong and that we are bringing sanity into the equation. Whenever there's more than one person together, there's one person is going to be the sanest among them. And you get to determine who that person is. You get to determine who that person is by your response. So you can always ask to be the sanest person in the room. You can always ask to be guided and led to the most sane response to anything. You don't always get there, but you can. God looked down from heaven upon the children of men to see if there were any that did understand, that did seek God. When God looks down from heaven upon the children of men to see if anybody's listening, that's a symbol, meaning that God is always there. God is always there, ready, willing, and able to help us, but will not come in uninvited. If we're having a problem with somebody gossiping against us, we could look up to God and ask for help in deciding how to handle the situation rather than taking it over by ourselves. Every one of them is gone back. They are all together become filthy. There is none that doeth good. No, not one. So when we are in the throes of egotism, it's because we are all thinking all by ourselves. And when we're thinking by ourselves, then we're believing that we are self-created and that there's nothing but us, and it's up to us and us alone to solve this problem. And the best that we can come up with is a reaction based on fear. But we are being taught in this psalm that there's another response, and that response has to do with us waiting and listening and being guided. Now, you don't have to call it God, and you don't even have to think of it as something outside of yourself, because it really isn't. But you can think of it as being a saner part of your mind that responds with compassion and understanding rather than getting in the dirt and just having the fight with them and having action, reaction, rather than resolution and healing. Have the workers of iniquity no knowledge, who eat up my people as they eat bread? They have not called upon God. That's what happens when you don't call upon God. In other words, when you don't ask for that saner part of the mind to come through and guide you, and all you do is react with fear, and fear is the only thing that you can experience if you think you're all by yourself and there's nothing but you against all of the evils of the world, then you get what you get. And you become one of the people that are eating up the people like bread. You become one of those people that have no knowledge. But you can have knowledge, but that's a decision and a choice that you have to make within the moment. You have to be able to be willing to see the ravings of this person or these people as being what they are, cries for help Because if you're not looking at them like infinite intelligence looks at them, which is cries for help, cries for compassion, then your response is going to be one of fear, where you have to fight back. So it says they have not called upon God. You can figure that out all by yourself by just calling upon God, by saying, by myself, by my own little ego mind's self, let's say, by my fear responses self, I don't think I'm going to make a good choice here. So I'm going to call upon that higher power, which you don't have to look at as being a separate deity, although it's sometimes helpful to do that, but rather the sanest part of my mind that I'm capable of experiencing, that is connected to the infinite rather than to the finite, then I can make some new choices. I can see this differently. There were they in great fear where no fear was, for God hath scattered the bones of him that encampeth against thee. Thou hast put them to shame, because God hath despised them. Now, when God despises something in the Psalms, it means that God does not acknowledge it. God doesn't acknowledge your ego because God knows your ego does not exist. God does not acknowledge the machinations of the ego mind because God knows that those things aren't real, that those things are just a figment of our own imaginations, and that is creating this world of ours of separation. And so God despises that simply means God does not acknowledge that. It's the same thing when God hates something. When you hate something in the Psalms, it means that you turn away from it. In this case, it does not acknowledge it. It says, there were they in great fear where no fear was. There is no fear in God. God didn't create fear. God didn't create a fearful world. God doesn't abide fear. God does not condone fear. God has nothing to do with fear. Fear is the antithesis of God. And therefore, fear itself can't really exist ultimately. Where there's fear where there was no fear means that we made it up. And how do you make up fear? By believing that there is nothing higher than you. By believing that you're all alone, all by yourself, and that you have to come up with everything yourself, and that there is no help available to you. That's all erroneous thinking that the ego mind creates for us. That, remember, the ego mind is not an entity. The ego is simply a habit of thinking, a thought system based on the idea that I'm separate from my creator, I'm separate from everybody else, I'm all by myself, I'm all alone, and I have to figure out everything all by myself. Oh, that the salvation of Israel were come out of Zion. Zion is the place where you and infinite intelligence are one, where you and God are one. That is that highest place in your mind that you're capable of ascending. That really high place in your mind that you are capable of ascending. You do your best to get to those exalted states of consciousness, and infinite intelligence meets you where you are. But remember that infinite intelligence doesn't do anything without you asking. So when you raise your mind up to try to meet infinite intelligence, that's you doing something. One of the qualities of infinite intelligence is responsiveness. So it responds to you. The salvation of Israel comes out of Zion. Now, the salvation of Israel is the salvation of your soul. That's what Israel is. Israel is the soul. And your soul, as Israel, is perfect, just the way it is. But it's being held captive by the ego mind. And so infinite intelligence saves your soul from the ego mind because you made the choice to go up to Zion. You've made the choice to exalt your thoughts to the highest thoughts that you're capable of. You've gone to that sanest part of your mind where sanity prevails, and the places that you can't reach all by yourself are taken care of for you. And that's salvation. That's the healing power of God. When God bringeth back the captivity of his people, Jacob shall rejoice, and Israel shall be glad. When God brings you out of captivity, that simply means that God restores your mind to sanity. And that means that all of this gossip, all of this slander, all of these things no longer are happening because you have been raised above that battlefield. You're no longer participating in them. It's as if the movie just ended. Now that is no longer being projected on the screen. When it says that when God bringeth back the captivity of his people, that's what this is. Jacob shall rejoice. Who's Jacob? Jacob is one of the patriarchs in the Bible. But Jacob had several stories about him that are interesting. For one thing, Jacob was flawed. Jacob was not nice all the time. Jacob didn't get it right all the time. In fact, Jacob got it wrong a lot of times. Jacob did some very questionable things, but Jacob's heart was in the right place and kept coming back again and again to infinite intelligence. And infinite intelligence didn't hold one mistake against Jacob, and instead renamed Jacob Israel. Now, how did the renaming of Jacob to Israel happen? Because Jacob wrestled with an angel. Jacob wrestled with an angel and said, I'm not leaving here until you give me a blessing, buddy. Now, there's angel lore that states that this angel was Samael, but that's probably debatable. That's what you get to do. You get to wrestle with the angel. You get to say, no, I'm not going to leave here until you bless me, until this is done. I don't want this gossip. I don't want this slander. And we're not leaving until you fix it. And what does God do when you start wrestling with that angel like that? God says, yay. Doesn't punish you. Doesn't say, who are you, you arrogant SOB? No, that's not how God is. God says, good for you. That is really showing me 100% that you mean business, right? Because God doesn't come in uninvited, because God doesn't attack. So the opposite of being uninvited is when you start wrestling with the angel and saying, I want this blessing. You're not asking for something hideous. You're not asking that the angel does something against its nature. You're asking that you get blessed, that you have blessings. And the blessing in this particular case is that you want this gossip and this slander ended. That's what God wants for you, and that's what the angel wants for you. But sometimes it's so important that you make the purity of your intentions known so that there is no question that you're not being attacked by this blessing. Do you see the difference? When you just say, oh, please bless me, and you don't really mean it, and infinite intelligence were to give you that blessing, it would be an attack. It would be infinite intelligence imposing its will upon you and saying your will no longer matters. But that's not how you were created. You were created with free will. So sometimes when we do like these very complex kinds of magic, it's not that the angels need our complex magic in order to give us the blessing. It means that we are demonstrating very clearly to our deep mind and to them that we are serious about what we want. That this isn't a passing fancy. We are serious. And that's the wrestling with the angel, is you are going to not leave this operation until you get what you want and that you mean business. And part of that wrestling with the angel for many of us is that we have to stop our own gossip. We have to stop our own slander. We have to really wrestle with ourselves to make sure that we control our own words. And that's not always easy, and we don't always get it right. But we keep coming back again and again until we do better and better. And that's exactly what this psalm is talking about. So you can keep coming back to this psalm each and every day until you have peace, that you have serenity, and you have certainty that things are working out for you. And when you get that sense of peace, serenity, and certainty, that's a very clear indication to you from your deep mind that the spell has finished and it's just on its way to manifestation, and you can move off of this and onto something else. Thank you so very much for joining us today. Until next time, blessed be.